Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is all about books that I've reread. And by and large, these are going to be books that are 5-star reads for me. I don't hate reread, so these are books that have a very special place in my heart. Quite a few of them are some of my favorite books of all time, and I can link that video for you if you're interested. But I find that I reread books almost like it's for comfort, or like it's a security blanket. So I find when things are beyond my control in my personal life or in the world, that I revert back to or resort to reading books that I've already read. So books that I know what's going to happen, so it's very predictable and stable in that way. These are worlds that I'm familiar with, characters that I love, and there's just something nice and cozy about rereading it. So these are some of the books that I'm going to be talking about today. These are the ones that I've reread at least once, in some cases a few more times than that. But why don't we dive right in? The first book I'm going to talk about has a really special place in my heart, and for most of my life I considered it one of my favorite books of all time. And it's really only in recent years, because I came to understand some of the more problematic elements of the book, that I've kind of removed it from that list. But this is probably one of my most reread books of all time, and that is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, which is like an epic Civil War love story about Scarlet O'Hara and Rhett Butler. Scarlet is this not necessarily quite likable Southern belle. She has like a conniving streak to her, but she lives through the Civil War and kind of sort of falls in love with this roguish character, Rhett Butler. And it starts just before the Civil War is declared, goes through the struggles of Southerners during the war, like these Southern plantation owners, the return of soldiers to the plantations after the war, and the Reconstruction era. And this is one of these books that, as I've said, it's probably my most reread book. I've probably read it a half dozen times, seen the movie probably 100 times. Like, it's bad. It's really bad. This is also a large book. I think it's probably one of the first big books that I read. It's a little over 1,000 pages, but despite that fact, this is a book that I devoured in one sitting multiple times. So it is definitely a cozy read, but there are some elements to it that are problematic. There is a very strange and very antiquated view of sexual assault. There is more than a bit of sympathy for the KKK. The portrayal of the black characters is also problematic, but it's one of these books I haven't reread recently. I would certainly love to reread it now, kind of through the lens of Me Too and also Black Lives Matter, and really look at it through that way, or look at it that way. But since it is my most reread book, I couldn't do this list and not include it. The next book is definitely a guilty pleasure for me. It's somewhat embarrassing how many times I've reread this book, because I can admit that it is trash, but it is good trash, you know? It's like it hits a spot. And that book is Scarlet by Alexandra Ripley, and this is the sequel to Gone with the Wind that was written in the 1990s, and it was like an instant bestseller, and it picks up where Gone with the Wind left off, with Scarlet returning to Tara, and a continuation of the love story between Scarlet and Rhett Butler. And as I said, it is trash, but it is good trash. It is another massive book. It is nearly 900 pages long, and yet again, this is a book that I have read multiple times in one sitting, in one day. It's just fun. I don't take it too seriously. You can't take it too seriously, to be quite honest. But there's something really, really charming about it if you are a Gone with the Wind fan. There is a really, really, really bad movie adaptation of this book that I would not recommend. But if you're shopping around for some kind of fluffy romantic stuff, maybe this, if you've read Gone with the Wind. Moving along to one of my favorite books of all time, and yes, it was in that video. Yes, I have been talking about this book series non-stop this year because I'm trying to read the entire thing, which is quite a task, but we're talking Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, and this is book 1 in the series. I've read this twice now, the second time this year actually, when I kicked off my attempt to read the entire series in 2021, and this is just one of my favorites. It's set in Scotland during the Jacobite Rebellion. This woman, Claire, ends up going through these mythical stones in the Scottish Highlands when her present time is the 1940s after the Second World War, and ends up in 18th century Scotland, where she marries Jamie Fraser, this Highland warrior, and it's their love story and everything they're going through kind of leading up to what will be the Jacobite Rebellion, although this book does not cover the Jacobite Rebellion. But I love Jamie and Claire. They are my OTP. I love the setting. I love that this feels like one of these really well researched historical fiction. The fantasy element doesn't really bother me all that much because it's very light. Admittedly, yes, she is a 20th century woman living in 18th century Scotland, but literally she travels back in time, and then it's kind of easy to forget that she's traveled back in time because the history is just so rich and everything. But this is a book that I've read twice so far, and I would certainly reread it for a third, fourth, and fifth time. It makes me happy. I love their romance, and I'm realizing I've now basically talked about 3 books that are all about love and romance, so maybe that's also part of why they're so comforting. I'm a bit of a romantic, apparently, even if I don't want that in my life. But that's another story entirely. We're moving on to another favorite book of mine, which you can go to that video, you'll hear all about it, but it is gonna be Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I sound like a broken record, but I love Russians. That sounds funny. I love Russian literature, I love Russian history, and so Anna Karenina is one of these massive tomes that I have endeavored to read multiple times, and I'm so glad for it. The first time I read it, I was 15. The second time I read it, I was 30, and I can tell you that the reading experience is vastly different from a 15-year-old to a 30-year-old, but it's just a masterpiece. To be honest, this is my favorite Tolstoy novel that I've read. I think this is a great one if you're trying to be introduced to him, because I think it's accessible because the story is really about people and people's relationship with other people, and there's something really profound and insightful about the observations he makes about humans in general and their relationships, and it's about family, and it has romance, and it has drama and intrigue, and it's just a lot of fun. I read this for the second time with Katie from over at Katie Reads and Rants, and it was her first read, and she actually was surprised at how much she enjoyed it, and surprised at how quickly we read it as well. We read it last December, and we basically made a target, I think, to read 40 to 50 pages a day, And so we finished it in under 3 weeks just by reading that little bit. So again, my advice, if you are going to tackle this book, is to make small reading goals for yourself. Like, figure out what you're comfortable with reading and in a day for it, and just chip away at it. Don't try to rush through it because you will miss something. Just slow and steady here. But yeah, this is a treat. It's definitely a book that I will reread in the future. I'm thinking I will read it again before another 15 years pass, but maybe that's a trend for me. Maybe I should read it again when I'm 45. The next book is one that I've read probably too many times to count at this point. The first time I read it was in high school. I read it multiple times for classes in college, and then I've read it on my own, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And yes, this is a horrific cover. Not gonna lie, it kind of reminds me of Gollum from Lord of the Rings, but this is just one of these classics that I've read countless times, and I feel like every time I read it, there's like another layer unfurled. And I am just so fascinated by Mary Shelley as an individual. Like, she wrote this when she was 19 or 20 years old. It just boggles my mind. But this is truly one of these stories that's like perfect for spooky season. It's not horror, but there's like atmosphere and thrill and like some sort of darkness to it. But the book is really about Dr. Frankenstein, so the monster's name is not Frankenstein. This is an FYI. But Dr. Frankenstein basically reanimates a corpse. He takes a bunch of different body parts, puts them together to create this being, gives it life, and when he sees what he's created, he is horrified and spurns it, and the monster then is kind of thrust into the world and has to learn about humanity and also cope with the fact that he has been turned out and is hated by his creator. And not gonna lie, there's something really sympathetic about the monster in this book, and I think that's part of why it's so alarming, is that you do have sympathy for this creature that is created. But it's a classic that isn't very long. As I said, it's perfect for spooky season, and it's just one that I've read so many times, both as an assignment and also on my own. Moving right along to yet another book that would be perfect for spooky season, with another one of my favorite books of all time, with Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Come on, subscribers, you knew this was coming. You knew it. It was probably one of my most talked about books in 2020, and it was a reread for me. It's fabulous. Like chef's kiss. This is a romantic suspense where this unnamed heroine ends up marrying Mr. De Winter and moving with him to his home in, I think it's Cornwall in England. But the specter of his dead wife, Rebecca, looms over his new wife and their life together. And this is one of these books that is modern Gothic. There's lots to unpack. It's dark and moody and atmospheric. It has some stunning passages in it. I think it's one of the most beautiful opening sequences in a book, and it's just, I'm gushing. There's a reason why it's one of my favorite books of all time, to be sure. And unlike Frankenstein, this is a stunning cover. But yeah, this book has a very, very special place in my heart. And although part of the magic of this book is seeing how the mysteries are revealed and having the suspense and having that intrigue, every time I read it, it still surprises me a little. So there's just something magical about it. I would recommend watching the Orson Welles adaptation of it. The Netflix one doesn't capture the magic of this book. Like, it's fine if you just want pretty costumes, but it does not compare to this masterpiece at all. Like, not even, like, just no. Next is another classic that I've reread too many times to count. It was constantly beside me while I was writing my senior thesis, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and this just, it has a special place in my heart. It's the story of Jane Eyre as she goes from being a student to a governess and a teacher. There is a romance with her and Mr. Rochester, and it is like the quintessential Gothic novel. Again, there's a lot of atmosphere, there's a lot of suspense and mystery that's kind of dispersed throughout the book, and it's just one of those that every time I read it, I discover something new. And it really is a book that I need to revisit sometime soon because it has been at least a decade, but it is still a book that I've reread numerous times and enjoyed all of those times, so it deserved a place on this list. The next book is one that I actually reread for the first time earlier this year, and it is a play, Tea and Sympathy by Robert Anderson, and it's set in the 1950s in this all-boys school, and the character Tom is cruelly bullied by his peers and even his teachers, who, without real cause, think that he is gay and treat him horrifically because of it. And it is a book that deals with toxic masculinity and hazing and bullying, and it can definitely be triggering. The only character that is really kind to Tom is his teacher's wife, Laura, who sees him as a sensitive young man, not dissimilar from her first husband, who died, I believe, in one of the wars. And so it's a touching story of their relationship, which admittedly gets a bit questionable by the end. It's not a book that I would say is necessarily, like, it doesn't necessarily stand the test of time. Like, it feels very dated in the language that is used, but if you're interested in a story that's kind of like a time capsule of a time period that you can easily read in a sitting, I would recommend it. There's also a fabulous classic movie adaptation with Deborah Carr that I would highly recommend. Moving along to another book that is featured prominently on this channel because it was one of my favorite books of all time and also was in my Tennessee Williams video, and that is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof by Tennessee Williams, which is a fabulous, fabulous play that I have read at least a half dozen times, and I just love the characters in it. I love Maggie the cat. If I was ever going to act on stage, her character's one of those that I would want to play. It's just, there's so much to unpack in this story, and it is so filled with like these volatile characters, and it's so much about family and just lies and truth and rivalries, and it's really just like this rich family drama with Maggie the cat and her husband Brick going to Big Daddy's plantation to celebrate, I think it's his 65th birthday, and Big Daddy has just come back from this clinic and everyone is celebrating his birthday and long life, and Brick and Maggie have some marital problems they're working through. Brick and his brother are like fighting over inheritance. There's all this stuff that comes to be revealed, and the dialogue, the way that the characters interact, it's literally like a powder keg, and it's so fun to read, so fun to watch, but it's just a great story. And again, there's a reason it's one of my favorite books of all time, but I have reread this time and time again in different forms. I have this one, I have it in another book. I think I have a third edition of it somewhere. truth be told. But yeah, couldn't have this list without it. The next book is not a sexy pick at all, but I couldn't have this list without including this book, and the book I'm talking about is my very tattered edition of The Elements of Style by Shrunk and Evie White. William Shrunk Jr. to be specific, and Evie White. And I got this in high school, actually, and it was required reading, I think, for my 10th grade honors class or maybe my first AP English class. And it's really more of a reference book on writing, but it's one of these books that I've reread countless times on my own. Basically, whenever I'm about to endeavor on one of my bigger writing projects, like when I wrote my thesis, or when I attempted to write a novel, or when I attempted to write a nonfiction, like, the first thing I always do in preparation is read this book, which is why it's looking a little bit rough, to put it mildly. But it is just this book that I feel like, as far as being a reference, it really reminds me about how to write and what to do and what not to do. And I'm a huge proponent of breaking rules when you write, but I also feel that in order to break them and have it have the impact you want, you need to understand the rules first. And this is really, I have quite a few writing reference books. Like, I have the Stephen King one on writing, I have a book on dialogue, I have one on character development, one on writing a scene. I have tons of them, but this is the one that I have read cover to cover countless times in my life, and I know that I will continue to do so because it's just that important to my writing process in the end. So is it a sexy pick? Absolutely not, but yeah, it's there for a reason. But yeah, those are 10 of my most reread books in my book collection. As I mentioned, quite a few of them are favorite books of mine of all time. There's a reason I reread them, after all, but some of these are just also gems. As I said at the beginning of all of this, they are easily 5-star reads for me. So, but I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. And if you are a rereader, let me know what books you've reread in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.